Okay, I think we're going to start and see there are still some people signing in, but we'll just uh, get going with some of the logistics and then we'll get into the um, presentation if everyone's ready. Okay. So good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for taking time to join us tonight. We have some people here from the district to share some information with you and hopefully answer any questions that you might have. So I'm Jody Monroe, the superintendent of schools. Dave Hurst, our assistant superintendent, is here as well. Also Judy Kehoe, our chief business and financial officer. Karim Johnson, our director of transportation. Ian Knox, one of our elementary principals at Hamagrell, and Dave Domel, principal of the high school. So we've put together a presentation to talk about some of the COVID changes that we shared out recently. We also, not directly related to COVID, but somewhat indirectly, have been talking about some of the challenges with transportation. So we also thought it was important to include that this evening to try and get this information out to as many people as possible. Thank you. We did receive a good number of questions. So we did try and include your questions and responses to those this evening as well. So if you'd like to access closed captioning, you should be able to do that if you click the live transcript at the bottom of your screen. Then click the show subtitle, your transcript, the closed captioning should work for you. So tonight we are going to try and address, as I said, questions that were submitted in advance. We tried to consolidate some of them because we did get some that were duplicates. We'll be answering those as part of the presentation. Also, if you submitted a question ahead of time, it's not directly covered in today's meeting. You can certainly email me directly. There were some questions that were more specific to a building. So if that's the case, I would encourage you to reach out to the building principal if your question is not answered this evening. Also, if you have questions as part of the presentation, if you submit them in a Q&A during the meeting, we should have some time at the end to try and respond to any remaining questions. This is recorded, and any questions that we're either not able to answer or we don't get to this evening, we will try and do a follow-up communication to respond to those as well. Okay, so we're going to start with some of the COVID changes that we recently shared out. So one of the big changes, the most significant change really has to do with contact tracing. So New York State, I'm sure many of you heard this, is no longer conducting contact tracing. So individuals will not be contacted any longer by their local health department. And we will only conduct contact tracing in a limited and targeted capacity. For example, staff and students who are perhaps at higher risk for severe disease, or times and locations where there might be fewer layers of mitigation in place. For example, there are some classes with students with disabilities who are unable to wear a mask. So obviously, we would be doing some tracing in those specific scenarios. If there is a close contact that's identified, when we do have to look at those specific situations, we will contact parents and guardians, and we will update that information as it's shared in the general reporting in the positive cases to include the school, grade level, and any exposure on the bus. So the information that in the past had been shared out will have a little more detail in it so people are informed of where there's a potential exposure. There are some new terms being used to describe vaccination status. I can try to explain. It is a bit confusing. The New York State Department of Health is following the guidance from the CDC, and they use the term up to date on COVID vaccinations. So their definition of up to date means a person has received all their COVID vaccines, including their booster when they are eligible. which for Pfizer and Moderna is 5 months currently, and I believe Johnson & Johnson is 2 months. Fully vaccinated means a person has received their primary series of the vaccine, and it's 2 weeks after that last dose. The CDC is currently recommending that everyone ages 12 and above should get a booster at least 5 months after the last dose in their primary series. We are working with Crestwood Pharmacy, who has done our vaccine clinics in the past, and we will be hosting a booster clinic on Friday, February 4th, and we will be sending out some additional information about that clinic. So yesterday, in the information that we shared out, there's a nice chart. Hopefully it's easy for parents to follow because there are a lot of different scenarios, but we try to streamline it to let you know if your child can come to school or not. So if your child has tested positive with symptoms, then your child cannot come to school. And the new, one of the more recent changes is your child must isolate for a minimum of 5 days. Day 0 is actually when symptoms began, and you can return to school on day 6 if you're fever-free for 24 hours and you're without symptoms, and those symptoms are detailed out in our communication. However, the student is expected and has to be able to wear a well-fitting mask at school. And if not, they should stay out, isolate through day 10, and any student who is immunocompromised should also continuing to isolate for the full 10 days. If a child has tested positive but has no symptoms, the same situation applies. Your child must stay home for 5 days without symptoms and can return to school on day 6. Again, the child must be able to wear a well-fitting mask, and if not, isolate through day 10. In some situations, there have been students who have developed symptoms during this time, and so that isolation period would reset and begin the day that symptoms began. If you are a close contact, and you have no symptoms and your vaccinations are all up to date. So let's say someone in the family is positive, but you have no symptoms and your vaccines are current, a child can attend school and ride the bus. A test is recommended on at least day 5 after the exposure. It is not required. And if symptoms develop, then you would follow the isolation protocols. If you are close contact with no symptoms and you're not currently up to date with your vaccines, then the student may not come to school. They do have to stay home for a minimum of 5 days, unless they have tested positive for COVID in the last 90 days. The student may return to school on day 6 if they remain symptom-free. And again, if there's a development of symptoms, then you follow the prior information. So this has changed in regards to what tests are acceptable for return to school if my child gets test negative for COVID. So acceptable test results to return to school are a PCR test, a rapid test, which includes a rapid PCR or an antigen test by a provider or a lab, and now 2 over-the-counter home antigen tests taken 24 to 48 hours apart. And just to note on the over-the-counter test, we have given a good number of those out. All of our schools, we did receive additional home test kits, and all of our schools do have home tests to provide should you need them. So if you do, please contact either the school nurse or the school principal, and they'll make sure that they can provide one to you. So if your child is returning to school, what are the resolving symptoms you should be monitoring? So you have to be fever-free for 24 hours without medication. There should be no new loss of taste or smell, no runny nose, no more than infrequent non-productive cough, and obviously it shouldn't be getting worse. And if the student is having a cough, students still need to be able to tolerate wearing a mask. No excessive or unusual fatigue, no persistent headache, no nausea, diarrhea, or vomiting. Again, if you have any questions about the symptoms or where your child may be, please feel free to contact any of our school nurses who will be able to assist you with those resolving symptoms and if it's appropriate for your child to return to school. Is the district supplying COVID tests to teachers and support staffs? New York State has provided COVID test kits. Initially, we did not have enough to provide to all students and staff. We have, as I just said, received some additional test kits. So we have them for home use by families who need them. Our school nurses also have test kits. So when a student does become symptomatic, if you need a home test kit, the nurse can provide that to you. And our human resources department does have a test kit for any symptomatic faculty or staff who also needs one to be tested. Why are we not using test to stay for unvaccinated students? So schools were allowed it not too long ago to consider test to stay as an option. It was a local county health department decision. And I know some other counties did permit this before we were permitted to do it. The program does require resources that we did not have, particularly at the time when this first was allowed. We did not have testing to be able to offer test to stay. It's also very time consuming for our nursing staff who are already extremely busy. And now with the reduced isolation and quarantine and the change in contact tracing, test to stay really is not something that we need to consider as we move forward. Why are we still requiring masks outside? So the outdoor mask guidance from New York State does stipulate that masks must be worn outdoors where 3 feet of distance cannot be maintained. So in phys ed classes, for example, students were able to take their mask outdoors because it's structured activity that the teachers could make sure students were maintaining that distance. So at the only area where students still have to keep a mask on outdoors is during elementary recess, where we're allowing different cohorts of students to play together. We cannot guarantee that they can maintain 3 feet of distance between students. In the current vaccination rates in our schools, in the high school, we have a 90% vaccination rate. Our middle school is up to 82%, and these are students who have received at least 1 dose of the 2-dose vaccine series. Much of this information has been reported by parents. So if you have had your child vaccinated and you haven't shared that with our school nurses, we would appreciate that you do so. In our elementary schools, we have our Eagle is at 45%, Ellesmere is at 74%, Glenmont is at 73%, Hammergrell is at 74%, and Slingerlands is currently at 50%. The next question I'm going to turn over to Mr. Knox to talk about if parents will be allowed in the schools.
Thank you. So we would all agree that a parent-school relationship is vital to our kids' education. And although having parents in schools is more than ideal, read alouds, events, we're going to continue to closely monitor COVID cases. And as soon as we're able to reduce mitigation strategies while keeping students safe, we will do so. So I know myself and other principals are working with our PTA and PTOs to determine the appropriate time to allow parents back into the building. And certainly when we decide to do so, we'll be reaching out to families and letting them know about that. We do encourage families to reach out to their principals about remote opportunities for read alouds and assemblies that we're doing as schools. So that's an opportunity for parents to also be a part of their child's education.
Thanks, Mr. Knox. Our students that had COVID and are returning to school after 5 days, eating in the classroom with their classmates, and are there any special COVID mitigation strategies in place? So with the new protocols, we are doubling down on efforts to keep students safe at lunchtime. We have made changes, particularly at the high school level, where students were eating in different locations that were not always at 6 feet. So we've limited access to those areas for the time being. So while students are allowed to be 3 feet apart at school, we have worked to ensure that at lunch now they are all at least 6 feet apart. So those are additional mitigation strategies that we have put in place. Also, when students are eating, they are to have their mask off, but we do ask students that when they are done eating and want to socialize with their peers, that they be compliant with mask and put those masks back on. And I have to say that the students have been really good about following those instructions and making sure that they're doing their part to be safe. The next question is for Mr. Domel about mask compliance.
Thanks, Jody. What are we doing to enforce mask compliance and to support teachers when students refuse to comply? So just like many of the rules or guidelines we have in our code of conduct, our students overall do a fantastic job. Despite that, we obviously do have some students, like with all of our rules, that will from time to time they'll have their mask below their nose or below their mouth, and in such case we handle it as we do with any code of conduct violation. A lot of times we're taking students first, and it's progressive. We're trying to educate them on why they need to do it, and then from there it will move on to, like I said, following our code of conduct with a disciplinary action. At this point, we have encouraged over and over our teachers over and over again to make sure that we're working with administration, with students that consistently, violate our mask policy. Like Ms. Monroe said, though, the majority of our students are doing a fantastic job, and we continue efforts with those students that will violate it through our code of conduct.
Next one is you too, Dave.
Yep. What is the criteria for shutting down or restarting individual sports? I believe we just recently had this happen, and there's no specific guidelines. We monitor, obviously we monitor all the positive cases and reports. Our nurses do a great job working with myself, the athletic director, the coaches, and we use that data and consult with each other to determine, if it is at a point where we need to, or we feel it's in the best interest of the students and, our athletic program with certain sports to either take a break or restart. So there's no set plan. It's a lot of consultation and working collaboratively together to determine a stop or a start.
Okay. Also, in regards to the sports, just to add one more piece of it, the athletic directors in the area are also in regular communication with each other about any cases within their team. So everyone is trying to make the best efforts to reduce any type of spread. So when will the district drop the mask mandate? So the mask mandate is actually a state mandate, and it was a state mandate in schools even prior to the governor making a mandate for everybody in public places. So when that mandate is lifted, we will certainly assess transmission data locally and within the school community to decide on any changes to the mask requirements here at BC. We all are looking forward to a time when we are able to do that. This one goes back to Mr. Domel about junior prom.
Yeah, these are very important questions. The fun stuff that I hope that most of the kids are looking forward to. We were able to last year successfully pull off a senior ball. I feel like there's a very good chance We're cautiously optimistic, but there's a very good chance after pulling off what we did last year for the seniors that we can definitely do something this year for the juniors and seniors. So again, cautiously optimistic, but we've been through it once. We pulled it off once. It was successful. And we will do everything we can to allow more opportunities for fun and for groups to be together.
Do we anticipate if COVID vaccines becoming mandatory for school enrollment, and do you support the position? The vaccine mandate for students would actually be a directive of the New York State Department of Health. That's not a local county health department decision. So just like any other vaccine requirements, that is the New York State Department of Health, and schools are required to follow that guidance. As of now, we've not been told there's any requirement for a COVID vaccine for students. This goes back to Mr. Domel for the traffic at the high school during drop off and pickup.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for your patience with the parking lot. There's just a huge volume and it comes at once. I know the reason is because we want to avoid buses, and that's perfectly understandable. We're doing the best we can to utilize staff as well as much as possible in areas and troubleshooting different areas. Our school resource officer has been monitoring certain locations and providing me with guidance as to how we can be a little more effective and efficient. So we're doing the best we can. The volume is obviously the issue, and the short period of time that those cars are coming. So again, I thank you for your patience, and we're doing as much as possible to try to ease that.
We've heard there are teacher support staff shortages in buildings. Is this impacting students? So just like many other businesses, I'm sure this is not a surprise. The district is experiencing staff shortages in several areas. You'll hear a little bit more about that when we talk about transportation and the bus driver shortage. We have been fortunate here in that we do have substitutes. Again, we don't have as many substitutes as we've had in the past. We do have agreements with our staff to help cover classes when they are needed. And that's been extremely helpful to have our own teachers being able to pick up a colleague's class when needed. So I think we are far better off than some other businesses and some other school districts even. But yes, it's a challenge, certainly in some areas every day. But do I think it's impacting students? I mean, anything potentially could be impactful to students, but I do think that our principals and our teachers and our support staff have done a great job to really reduce any impact to students this year. At the January 20th board meeting, you said quarantine is no longer required. Yep. So can I clarify that as isolation is still required in the new guidelines, right? So quarantining was really a result of contact tracing, and contact tracing is no longer required. So both in New York State and the Albany County Department of Health, they are no longer contact tracing. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We will do limited contact tracing, and it will be targeted, particularly focusing on situations where students and staff are at higher risk. So students had been quarantined in a school setting. That was a result of the contact tracing and our reporting to Albany County Department of Health. This has been a result of contact tracing and that we did and reported to Albany County, and then people received quarantine orders from them. So what we will be doing moving forward is we will continue to do case investigations at the school. For example, is a student involved in an extracurricular activity? Are they on the bus? And we'll report that information out. And then we'll look, are there any close contacts that are at higher risk? To clarify further, students who test positive are students who have to isolate. So you're only in isolation when you're actually positive. So those are the differences between isolation and quarantining. So I'm going to turn the next question over to Mr. Hurst, our Assistant Superintendent.
Thank you, Jody. So do you anticipate a later start time for high school next year? As we discussed at our Board of Education meeting in the beginning of January, we sort of have a 3-year plan in terms of trying to help mitigate the challenges that we're having with transportation. So as you'll see later in this presentation, year 1, we've made adjustments to our bus driver contract to make employment more attractive, to try to recruit new drivers. In year 2, we will be looking at eligibility for ridership. And then in year 3, we would be looking at bell times. So for next year, the bell times will remain essentially the same as they are this year. And we will be discussing over the remainder of this year and into the fall new bell times, and then that will be into effect the following year. So will live streaming of classes continue for students who are at home for COVID-related reasons? So you're getting sort of a sneak peek, and communication will be sent out tomorrow. But we are going to continue live streaming for 1 more week through January 28th, which is the end of the semester. As indicated when we initially began live streaming, it is only a temporary measure due to this post-holiday COVID surge that we've seen. So beginning January 31st, as we've seen in the last 2 weeks, our numbers are coming back down to manageable numbers in terms of being able to offer our tutoring model. We will be returning to that model January 31st, which is what we used beginning in September. So students that are excluded from school due to COVID protocols will be able to access their assignments immediately when they're out. And then if they're going to be out for more than 3 consecutive days, they will also be begin to receive supplemental instruction in the form of tutoring. And we do believe that this will be quite limited in scope, knowing that the quarantine or the exclusion is now 5 days instead of 10. For next year at elementary schools, is there a goal of starting or and ending the school day at the same time for everyone, regardless of transportation mode, allowing for more instruction time? So we weren't quite sure how to interpret this question. So I'll go with 2 different sort of answers. One, if this was meant to imply that, if students taking the bus versus students walking / getting rides from parents would start school and end school at different times, we certainly have no plan to do that. All students, regardless of mode of transportation, will be starting and ending at the same time. And then the other issue was, did this mean, is elementary going to start at the same time as the middle, start at the same time as the high school? And that also is a no. We still will need to maintain a 3-tier busing system. As I indicated a moment ago, we're going to be using the same schedule that we used this year. So in the transportation discussion, we will get a little bit more deeply into this idea. So the next, again, has to deal with the proposal of changing the start time to 7:30 at the elementary level. Have we considered the risks for youngest children being outside at the darkest and coldest parts of the morning? So yes, we've examined this possibility for sure. It's one of the considerations that we're looking at, but again, it's just one of the considerations. So after we present tonight, the bell options similar to what I presented back on January 5th, we will be reaching out to families for feedback on these different options. But bell time changes would be the last decision, as I mentioned earlier. It's really year 3 of our process. And if we're going to change bell times, it would not be until the 2023-24 school year. And then can the school explain how flip-flopping elementary start times with high school start times helps alleviate the problem of too few bus drivers? They seem to like separate issues. So they are, and they are not separate issues. So the one thing I could say is that, as you'll see when we do the bell time presentation in a moment, there's sort of an optimal needed turnaround time for buses in order to be able to make our transportation system work. And the length of our student days varies from level to level. So at the elementary level, we have the shortest student day, and then the high school day is actually 15 minutes longer, and the middle school day is 35 minutes longer than the elementary day. So depending on where the days are placed, that does impact the amount of turnaround time that you have. So by having the elementary go last as they currently do, especially now that they're following the middle school, there's just not enough turnaround time for the drop off of middle school students and then have the buses turn around and come back and get the elementary students. So by putting elementary first or second for that matter, that does have an impact on that. We would need fewer runs because we'd be able to get that turnaround time down. So again, the main goal of looking at bell time changes is to honor the later start time committee that we formed a few years ago. And also, again, with the bus driver shortage, the 3-tier system is something that we definitely need to keep in place.
Okay, I think this is moving to Judy Kehoe, correct?
Yes.
Judy, I don't see, oh, there, now I see you.
Okay, I'm here. So we wanted to use this opportunity tonight to make sure that the community was fully informed on what options that we are looking at. I'm sure you've seen it on the national news. You've seen our signs advertising for bus drivers, the bus open houses. We really are no different than other schools and other businesses, even throughout the country, where being a driver with your commercial driver's license makes you a pretty hot commodity on the labor market. But, with the pressures of COVID, we have really seen a marked decrease in the number of our drivers. 2 years ago, we had 87 drivers covering our routes. And following COVID going into this year, and even as we ended last year, we were down to about 59 drivers. We have drivers who will be retiring soon. So even though we're doing our best to hire new drivers, it is going to be likely a long-term challenge for us to have enough drivers to staff our routes. So what we quickly concluded is that there really isn't a single solution that is going to help us solve this issue, but there are multiple things that we could do. Each plan has some pros and some cons. Honestly, we would love to be able to keep it the way we have it now, but there are some very real constraints that affect us creating these efficient routes. So when we say efficient routes, obviously we would be looking for buses that are largely full with our students, that we're able to complete those routes in a reasonable amount of time, ideally less than 45 minutes, but generally not more than an hour of ride time at the most. And of course, getting them there on time. As you've probably seen at some of our elementary schools, we've had some delays with pickups or drop-offs, 5 to 10 minutes or so, but of course that's an impact to the student day. So we really have devoted quite a bit of time trying to identify what is the best way to help solve this that creates the least possible impact for the broader school community. So the first phase of this that we have in fact completed is trying to make ourselves a competitive employer in the regional market as it relates to our bus drivers. The second phase is affecting actual eligibility for transportation. So if you have fewer children who are eligible to ride based on shifting our eligibility thresholds, that is the distances that you're able to get a ride, your distance from home to the school. If we increase those distance thresholds, that means fewer children will need to ride the bus. And then lastly, as Dr. Hurst noted, modifying those bell times. If the options 1 and options 2 really help us address these issues, maybe we won't even need to do that in the 3rd year out. But we're trying to make sure that we have plenty of opportunity to discuss these changes and get parents' feedback and any suggestions that they have that might better address these issues. So I'd like to talk a little bit more on the next slide about driver compensation. So at the first meeting in January, the Board of Education approved a modification to the existing labor contract that we have with our non-instructional staff. And we were able to get an increase for our drivers from $19.67 an hour to start up to almost $24 an hour. So these are for our newest drivers who were earning a lower amount on the current contract scales. It affects close to 24 drivers. And what that means for them is roughly $4,000 more per year, which makes us more competitive. The schedule for bus drivers had also been a challenge. They're driving very early in the morning for a few hours, and then they're coming back again in the afternoon. So many times those days are very varying schedules. So giving some certainty to the schedules for the drivers also helps us be more competitive. So we established a 6-hour minimum for our driver schedules. Generally, that means a 3-hour block of time in the morning and then another 3-hour block of time in the afternoon. We also wanted to incentivize staff to help steer driver candidates to the district. So we negotiated a $600 referral bonus. So if a staff member refers a driver and we end up hiring that driver after they've been working for us for a 6-month period, they're eligible for a $600 referral bonus. The new drivers, if we can get them on board and if they stay with us for 1 year, we also negotiated a retention bonus. So following that 1 year of driving for us, not counting summers, after 12 months of driving, then they would be eligible for the $1,000 retention bonus. So we did survey how we were doing relative to neighboring districts, and this is something that should make us competitive. So we're hoping that we get the floodgates opened and that we have a bunch of new drivers coming to the district. So if you know anybody, please send them our way. We would appreciate it. The next phase of this relates to the eligibility for transportation. So right now, on the next slide, all of our elementary students are eligible for transportation, whether they live 2 doors down from the school or whether they live 6 miles away from their school. For our middle school students, if they live within a half mile of the middle school, they need to find their own way into school, either walking or carpooling or dropped off by their parents. For the high school, that distance is 1 mile. So New York State actually allows for K-8 students to have a limit of up to 2 miles. And for the high school students, it's 3 miles. And we want to make it very clear to the community that we are not advocating going to these thresholds because that clearly is impactful. If we were to do that for our elementary schools, we would probably have 2 buses for all of our elementary students district-wide. Clearly very impactful and too harsh for what we're thinking is necessary at this point. So what we tried to do was structure the walk zones so that we could generate a similar number of students across all the levels, elementary, middle, and high school. Because we use the 3-tier routing, in order to enable us to downsize the number of routes that we have, we would need to have similar numbers of students no longer eligible for transportation. So based on these potential walk zones that we're looking at now, we estimate that we would probably be able to reduce the number of drivers needed by 4, possibly 5 drivers. So clearly not going to solve our entire problem, but it's designed to be something that would help us close that gap between the drivers we have versus the drivers that we would need. So with these expanded walk zones, we created some maps because we really want to communicate this and have families look at this. So these are draft maps. These are listed as possible elementary zones. And we created these by taking the 0.75 mile distance, in this case from Eagle Elementary, to the homes within the boundaries of Eagle Elementary. What this change would mean is if your home is located within that pink shaded area, you would not be eligible for transportation at all. So students would need to walk, bike, or otherwise get a ride to come into school. There are certainly downsides. We were talking about the traffic impacts. We've certainly seen traffic impacts through COVID when trying to maintain social distancing. We had asked families to help us bring students to school. So this would probably have a similar impact where we're going to have more traffic at the schools. So again, it's not the ideal necessarily, but it does help us with the driver shortages. The next slide is what this looks like for Ellesmere Elementary. So again, if you're in the pink shaded zone, you would no longer be eligible for transportation if the board approves the 3/4 of a mile distance. So for Glenmont, the 3/4 of a mile is problematic from a safety concern. If you were to go south on this map, you're heading south on 9W, that yellow route is 9W that passes right in front of Glenmont. This road, based on the most recent traffic studies that we looked at, has about 1,200 cars passing on it per hour in around that 9 to 10 o'clock timeframe. So with the new roundabouts down there, the lack of a traffic device, the traffic volumes in that commuting time period, we clearly would not want to have students walking to school if they lived at the homes within the 0.75 miles, say off of Furabush Road. So the tool that we have to help mitigate those risks is something called a child safety zone. And we have been looking at that as a possible way to still be able to provide transportation to families who we would not want to have their children's crossing areas that are dangerous. So these child safety zone definitions are put out by the Department of Transportation, and they have a point system that looks at things like the volume of traffic and whether there are available sidewalks, whether there are intersection controls, things like stop signs or pedestrian crosswalk buttons. So for any of these elementary areas where we think it would be hazardous for students if they lived within that 0.75 mile, we haven't shaded those areas on these maps. And the reason we haven't is because we're evaluating those child safety zones. So as part of this review process, we would ultimately be making a recommendation to the board to provide transportation for some students within that 0.75 mile range if it is deemed unsafe, according to this DOT evaluation system, for them to get to school. So that applies in very limited areas within town. We are still researching that and putting those reports together. But this map represents what that would look like based on what we know now for Glenmont. On the next slide, this is for, I have to move my grid so I can see what school we're at here. Hamagrail. So for Hamagrail, again, you can see these boundaries. This is in keeping with the 0.75. We recognize that not all of these roads are listed on these maps. We are working to enlarge these maps and to make sure that all the streets are labeled, and we will make those available to the community as well once they are ready. But I think if you live in these neighborhoods and you're looking at the map, you can probably pinpoint where you are and be able to tell if you would be affected by this. Similarly, for Slingerlands Elementary, this is what the ineligible zone would look like. And then on the next slide is the middle school. So for the middle school, that is currently a half-mile eligibility threshold. We are considering increasing that to 1 mile. So if your house is within the purple zone on this map, you would need to find your own transportation to get to and from school. Similarly, for the high school that is currently at 1 mile, the consideration is to increase that up to 1.5 miles. So Again, you can see the neighborhoods and which homes would be affected by this if those changes come to pass. Any of these changes would require obviously feedback from the community so that we can really help get to the best possible solution. It would have to be approved by the Board of Education, and then if approved by the Board of Education, would actually be subject to a community vote. So these would all be appearing as propositions on the May ballot for the school district. So again, we'll encourage you to, once we post all of those maps in larger detail, please do look at those. And if you have any questions or concerns about that, we would like to hear your feedback so that we can consider and modify the plan. If you have concerns about those child safety zones and whether or not that would apply, again, feed us that information and we will gladly take a look at that. I'm going to turn it back to Dave Hurst to talk about the bell times at this point.
Thank you, Judy. So as I mentioned when I was answering some of the questions regarding school start times, we have been considering bell times. This has been an ongoing discussion throughout the course of the year, and we did present it twice to the Board of Education within the last couple of months. So the first thing I want to talk about there are some variables that we do have to consider. The length of the instructional day. There are state ed requirements built into that in terms of the number of minutes. There are contractual obligations with our bargaining units. The bus turnaround time, which I mentioned, in looking at the different times, we do need 45 minutes in order to turn buses around to provide on-time service. We also have to consider reasonable start and end times, right? We have to consider the needs of our families, of our students, and of our staff. And then we also want to make sure that this aligns with our wellness goals, which is why we convened our Start School Later at the high school committee a couple of years ago. So we have three models that we are going to be putting out for comment. The first model is essentially the model we're using right now with slight variation to allow for that bus turnaround time. It has the high school going first, followed by the middle school, followed by elementary. So this is very much similar to what we're doing now and what we were doing prior to the Start School Later committee. Our second option flips the middle and the high school. So middle school would take the earlier time, and the high school in the middle, and then elementary would essentially stay where they are right now. And again, this is a model that did come up during our Start School Later committee discussions. And this is one of the reasons we went to the two-tier system, which was viable at the time due to the number of drivers, is that the committee felt that not only should high school students be starting later, but middle school, there's not, in terms of, age and developmental difference between an 8th and a 9th grader, they're essentially the same. So to say that a 9th grader can't start school early, but an 8th grader can, the committee did not feel that made a whole lot of sense. So this sort of flips back just the middle and the high school start times. And then the final model, which actually gives us the greatest amount of comfort in terms of turnaround time, actually has the elementary going first. And again, these times are just sort of starting points. There's room to move things up and down slightly, but essentially the elementary would be going first, followed by the high school, followed by the middle school. And so these are really the three options that we would like to get feedback from the community. The pros and cons of models A, B, and C, so that we can have further discussions on these models, and like I said, over the course of the rest of this year and into the fall, be able to make some more decisions, and then essentially probably boil it down to two final models that we would present for sort of final discussion and then ultimately approval.
Okay, I think we've concluded our slides to present. I can see there's some, I can't see them, but I can see there's some questions that were entered in the Q&A. So Joellen, can you see the Q&A? Do you want to go through any questions that we can answer?
Yep, let me, I'll start. I see one regarding, walk distances, possible walking distance changes. So can you answer, maybe Judy can answer this, are those distances as the crow flies or the distance that one would actually have to walk?
So it is not as the crow flies, or we'd have a nice round circle stemming out from the middle schools. What SED rules require is that that distance is measured from the child's home to their school. And it's by the shortest driving route available between the home and the school.
Okay, thank you. And now, Jody, back to you with a couple of COVID-related questions. Wondering if the bus qualifies as a high-risk area where the district will contact trace.
So the bus, we do not have to contact trace on buses any longer. Nor just as we don't have to do in schools. However, we will notify parents of a bus route and if there was an exposure on that bus route. Certainly, if there's a situation where we become aware of students not wearing masks properly, or there's a student who has medical issues that we're aware of, we would then follow up with some contact tracing, but the bus in and of itself is not considered higher risk with kids who are being compliant and wearing masks. But we will notify, and if you saw our notification today, I think it went out. It does list the bus routes on there for families to just be aware and monitor for symptoms.
It hasn't gone out yet, so, but
Okay.
it's going out.
It will be going out. It will be going out shortly.
Yeah. It appears that there's some concern about, one of the changes with the updated protocols is the use of the term up to date, that puts some restrictions on possibly athletics or extracurriculars for those who maybe are not up to date with booster shots. Can you talk about where that came from and kind of who that might affect?
Yeah, it's a little confusing, and there's been several updates and interpretations of that. So in our discussions regionally with the Capital Region BOCES, as well as the Saratoga Region BOCES and those health departments, that up to date and not being allowed to participate in co-curriculars if you don't have your boosters really is targeted toward a close contact. So for example, in most of our athletic situations, I'll just take that because someone had brought that up about basketball. If you're not deemed a close contact, so if the athletes are following appropriate protocols, they're wearing their mask, adhering to the COVID protocols, they're not considered a close contact if they were following those procedures. So the up-to-date and exclusion from extracurricular activities does only apply if you are a close contact. So if you are, for example, you have a family member who is COVID positive and you are not up to date, then you would potentially be excluded from extracurricular activities. But we don't, I think people were very concerned when we first saw that, but when we really went through that and had further discussions, it is only if you are identified as a close contact. So we don't see that being a large number of students who potentially would not be able to participate.
Okay, thanks. Back to, some of the transportation planning. How will the school district address safety concerns with more kids walking to school?
I can address that a little bit. I think we, in the past, had talked with the town about forming what's called a walking school bus, where we create help to facilitate a scenario where kids are walking in groups, often with an adult. So there's a few different models that we've looked at that other districts have used, where it might be run, and I'm not saying the PTA would do this, but parent volunteers, supervised students. So there's a schedule. We also do have crossing guards. So we've talked to the town about maybe how can we utilize crossing guards for something like that. Because obviously if students are walking in groups, that does make it safer. So we would look to offer some opportunities such as that. And I do think we have a number of parents who would be willing to help with that as well. So I think that we could definitely organize that to create a safer walking zone for those students.
Okay, and a couple of more dealing with any possible changes to, this is possible change to bell time. So regarding schools out. So if, and I'm sorry, my fingers are moving the slide now, I apologize. But if elementary school were to begin earlier and get out earlier, would schools out start earlier in the afternoon?
I don't know. We haven't had that discussion with schools out. I would think they would look to do that, but I haven't had a conversation with them about that.
Okay, thank you. So for Eagle Kids in the proposed walking range, has there been a traffic study for Delaware Avenue, specifically the light at Van Dyke and Delaware? Could you work with the town for enhanced crossing safety and delayed light changes?
Yeah, I know there has been a few different traffic studies done specifically at that location. And I know that because a few years ago, they made adjustments to the timing of the light during, I believe it was the high school arrival and dismissal time. So I know the town does have that information. I don't know, that was not too long ago, but I don't know if they have any recent information or not.
Okay.
That intersection also has the button that crossers can push. It stops all traffic, and then they have the clearly marked crosswalk. So under this child safety zone, that would be considered a safety feature. So that's what they like to see for the intersections, is those types of controls.
Okay, so, and there are a few different concerns that I will copy these down and keep these, but one of them is regarding bad weather and sidewalks not being cleared. Is that something the district could possibly address with the town?
Sure. We are generally in regular communication with the town when there is inclement weather and there's issues with safety in regards to sidewalks and roads. So we absolutely would be in communication with them about that.
Okay. And again, there are a couple of concerns, but I think maybe reiterating that the maps and street lists will be available and be shared, with families for feedback. So just wanted to restate that. And I see one question that came in. Let me just see. Okay, traffic has okay, and I think you addressed this. Even with current staggered student arrival and departure times at Slingerlands, traffic has been a big problem for Slingerlands. Will reduced busing exacerbate this problem?
Right. That's something that we need to keep in mind if there's changes that are made.
Okay, and that looks like that appears to be the last question that I'm seeing. And again, I will make sure these comments are copied and recorded.
Okay. To wrap up this evening, I do want to thank everyone for joining us. I'd like to thank Dave Hurst, Judy, Dave, Ian, and Karim, and Joellen and Navarre, who's tech behind the scenes, for helping put all of this together this evening. I also really want to thank all of our families for all of your support. Believe me, we know that it has been it's been challenges for sure. And we appreciate your patience as we try to figure some of this stuff out. The students have been great, our staff have been great, and really the support of our community just makes all of this very much worth it. And we're so appreciative of everything that you've done, your flexibility. So thanks so much for taking the time to join us. And again, if you have any questions or concerns or follow up after this meeting, please feel free to email us and we will do our best to respond to any questions that you have. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.